Hello everyone and welcome to SUNUP. I'm Lyndall Stout. We join you today from the North Range at OSU, where we want to spend a little bit of time talking about how the colder weather might impact your cattle management. Joining us now is our good friend Dave Lallman, our extension beef cattle specialist. And Dave, you and the team out here have a project set up where you're looking at better ways to use hay this winter.
Yes ma'am, we are. Last year we talked about 3 different ways that someone might extend their hay supply, and that's really, we put a project together to put all 3 of those technologies together and compare that to, you know, the standard, more standard practice.
So tell us how you've set that up and kind of remind us of what those 3 techniques are.
Okay, well, one thing a person could do to extend hay use is to limit cows' access to the hay. So instead of letting them have all the hay they would want to eat 24/7, we would somehow set the hay up in a dry lot pen like the one we're standing in, and put the round bale feeder or feeders in the middle of that pen, let the cows in, shut the gate, allow them 6 to maybe 8 hours of access, and at the end of that period push the cows out and shut the gate.
Go guys.
So that's one thing. The other thing we talked about was including feed additive. The one cleared for beef cows is rumensin. It's been shown that rumensin can improve forage utilization by about 10%, suggesting that you may be able to cut back on the amount of hay you feed by about another 10%. The third thing we talked about was just using a hay feeder that's better designed to limit hay waste. And so what we found in previous research was that some sort of a cone mechanism in the feeder to hold the bale in the middle and a solid sheet around the bottom of the feeder, those 2 things combined really reduced hay waste. So the project we have this year is 24/7 access, no feed additive, and a standard, kind of a more standard hay feeder compared to the modified cone feeder, including rumensin in the supplement, and about 6 hours of access to the hay.
Okay, and once you compile all the data, what do you think you might find?
Well, we hope that if all 3 of those technologies are additive, we hope that a producer could get through the winter with about 1/3 less hay used.
Okay, which is always appealing, the thought of saving money on that end. This time of year, the nights are getting colder. We know we're headed into the winter months. What kind of advice, kind of just a checklist for producers, would you have?
Just the common things that most producers hopefully are thinking about now. But if you put the list together, I guess I would start with, you know, make sure that you've preg checked. If it's a spring calving cow herd, preg check those cows this fall, because with such limited access to forage and people trying to access hay to get cows through the winter and so on, and the high cost, it just doesn't make much sense to winter an open cow this year. And so preg check them. Move, you know, cull cow prices are still really good, and so move those cows on out and market them if you can. Secondly, you know, work with your veterinarian and make sure that the herd health program is up to date, and if those fall vaccinations need to be given, well, get that out of the way before it gets any colder and the weather conditions get more difficult to accomplish that. More of a nutritional thing, I guess, that I would be concerned about after 2 years of drought is make sure that your animals are receiving a source of vitamin A, whether it's through the free choice mineral supplement program or whether it's through the concentrate feed like range cubes or whatever supplement they're feeding. They need a source of vitamin A, and probably wouldn't hurt to have a little vitamin A in the mineral and in the feed supplement, because it's very well documented that vitamin A goes to near 0 in forage supply and standing forage during a drought year and during the wintertime.
Okay, and kind of another rough year when it comes to hay and hay quality too?
It certainly is, yeah. Everybody's production, I think, or most people around the state's production was down to about, some people said as much as only 30% of their normal, some said 50, maybe 60, so drastically reduced. And probably the mineral and vitamin concentration in that hay supply is lower as well.
Okay. Dave, great advice as we head into winter, and be sure to keep us posted on the results of your study out here.
We'll do that. Thank you for coming out.
We'll see you later.
Hi, I'm Al Sutherland with your Mesonet weather report. We've had some wonderful weather to play in lately, but each day without rain stresses our crops and pastures. Soils in Oklahoma's major wheat growing areas are dry. Looking at a map of plant available water from the surface down to 16 inches, we see lots of brown colored areas with less than an inch of water for plants. These are areas with little moisture for wheat growth. Little growth means meager grazing for cattle. It also means that wheat and canola plants stay small, leaving them more susceptible to winter injury. Soils in yellow areas are in slightly better shape with closer to 2 inches of plant available water. Checking the soil sensors at 24 inches, we see lots of zeros in the dark brown areas. Those zeros indicate zero moisture at 24 inches for the southwest, northwest, north central, and east central parts of Oklahoma. The Keach-Byram Drought Index map shows more areas with red and purple as values climb higher from our meager rainfall. Tipton, Pawnee, Red Rock, Blackwell, May Ranch, and Buffalo have hit 700 or higher on a scale that is driest at 800. Only one site comes in below 200, Oklahoma City North. Gary, what is our drought status this week?
Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here with you. And as usual, I'm going to start out by talking about the latest U.S. Drought Monitor report. So let's take a look at that map. And I really wish we had better news on the drought front, but as you can see from this latest map released on Thursday, from the U.S. Drought Monitor, that D3 to D4 extreme to exceptional drought has continued to advance across Oklahoma. So I'm afraid the lack of rainfall over the last month or so has caused this map to worsen once again. Taking a look at the consecutive days with less than a quarter inch of rainfall from the Oklahoma Mesonet, this goes through Wednesday morning. You can see the reason why that drought has intensified so rapidly here in the last few weeks. Across western and northern Oklahoma, as many as 54 days without a single day with a quarter inch of rainfall. That's some serious dry weather. Kick it down a notch to days with less than a tenth of an inch of rainfall, and the news is pretty much as bad as what we saw in the quarter inch map. As many as 40 days without a tenth of an inch of rainfall across much of western and northern Oklahoma. The actual rainfall data itself from the Mesonet is pretty scary. We'll just start from October 1st, the beginning of the water year, through Wednesday morning, November 7th. You can see about 1.1 inches of precipitation on average across the state. That's 2.75 inches below normal, and the 9th driest October 1st through November 7th since 1921. And you can see now some parts of eastern Oklahoma and central Oklahoma have had some decent rainfall, but really desperately dry over much of the state. Several stations across western Oklahoma have had no rainfall since October 1st. Now hopefully by the time you've seen this, you've gotten some rainfall. It was in the forecast, but we all know that doesn't always work out. Regardless, we can always hope for more. That's it for this time. We'll see you next time on the Mesonet Weather Report.
Canola is starting to come up from the ground, and Oklahoma producers may have questions about their canola crop. And we have Josh Bouchon here to talk about, well, how does canola look across Oklahoma?
Well, a lot of guys are noticing that they were able to get a stand for the most part. Some guys that kind of did what they did last year were kind of forced in the situation of dusting it in. For 2 years in a row, they've gotten away with that procedure where you barely get the seed covered with soil and the next rain will bring it up. Some guys did try to plant it to moisture, maybe a little deeper than they should have, but once we had some heavy rains, that 3/4 of an inch planting depth might have ended up being a 2 to 2.5 inch planting depth. And we had some heavy rains that crushed some soils over, so we had some emergence issues due to that. Some guys were replanting, but some areas of the state, especially north central and western and southwest Oklahoma, are we're starting to see some drought influence on the plant. Just like the wheat that's starting to turn colors, the canola is too. It's just not going to grow very fast until the roots get down into some moisture where you get some rains to alleviate some of those issues. But for the most part, it's still holding on fairly well. One issue that we have seen this year that maybe some new producers haven't seen in the last year or last 2 years is freeze injury or symptoms on the leaves, some yellowing or chlorotic. Sometimes it kind of goes to tan or white, especially soft, fluffy ground that's very dry. It's going to just compound those freeze events. The soil will drop in temperature a little bit quicker than say a heavier soil with moisture in it. So we're seeing more frost symptoms. Most of the fields I've looked at, the plants are still alive. When producers are wanting to know if their plants are still alive or not, they really need to dig up the plant and see if the root's still pliable for one. If it's brittle, it's more than likely dead. But we want that root to be pliable and green all the way up to that crown, that center growing point. As long as that root and that crown are still viable, that plant's still alive. We've seen it in past years where we pretty much lose most all the forage that we produced in the fall throughout the winter, and the plant will put on more leaves in the spring as it comes out of the freezes. So don't worry about it too much. I'd still get out and look out and evaluate your stands. You might have lost some of the smaller plants. We typically like to see at least 4 leaves on it before we get a hard freeze on it, but some fields are worse than others. Like I said, just depends on their condition of their soils in. Might have compounded those freezes we've had the last couple weeks, but most of it seems to be growing out of it.
Okay, and something producers should be thinking about, maybe insects and diseases? Exactly,
Especially in a drought year, we really want to stay on top of our weeds and insects. We don't want to stress the plant any more than we need to. So our thresholds for those pests will be lower than typical, especially if you have a thinner or marginal stand where you want to try to retain as many plants as you can. But if you have a nice lush crop such as this one, you can withstand some more insects and stuff like that before you need a spray. But it is very critical, like I said, especially in drought years, to get on top of those weeds as soon as you can. I like to see 2 to 3 leaves on the canola before we drive across it with the herbicides. But make sure you get in there in a timely fashion. We might have some more weeds emerge out later in the fall and into the winter, but the main flush that's going to be detrimental to the yield is the weeds that come up with or shortly after the crop. So this first flush of weeds is the most critical to get out in a timely fashion, and most guys will come up with the secondary application early spring to get any of those escapes or any of them that emerged after their first application. So like I said, get that first shot of herbicide on. And a lot of guys, if they're going across with the Roundup, they'll want to look extra hard, see if they have any worms out there, and if they need to, add an insecticide with that herbicide. So get out there and scout, see what kind of threshold you're looking at. Different weeds or weeds and worms are out there. Haven't seen any aphids, but we have seen, just like every year, some diamondback moth larvae, those little green worms across the state, and we have seen some armyworms and some cutworms. So get out there and look around, see if you can see any damage, and spray as soon as you see them, or not as soon as you see them, but as soon as they reach the thresholds for that particular field.
Okay, and just as a side note, the canola looks pretty hardy right now across the state, well, in parts across the state, as compared to the wheat, but that's because it has a taproot.
Being a broadleaf with the taproot, it does have some characteristics that will inhibit to go down a little bit deeper for some water. Grasses like wheat have a fibrous root system. May not be able to get down to some of that subsoil moisture if we have it. A lot of our Oklahoma fields are still dry at depths. We've been in a drought for 2-3 years now, so. But if there is moisture down there to be found, if it has some moisture to get it going, that taproot, as long as there's not a hard pan or something like that, it can reach it fairly quickly. Like this crop has. This particular field is fairly sandy, so we don't have much topsoil moisture, but it was able to get down fairly quick and get established. So yes, that taproot does help. We've seen in past years, especially down southwest, where we had some fields of canola maybe outproduce some winter wheat because of the drought. But just like always, we're one day closer to rain. Hopefully in the next couple weeks we'll get some rains to get this crop a little bit further in development into some of these harder freezes this winter.
Okay, well, thank you very much. That's kind of what we do in Oklahoma is wait on rain. Josh Bouchong with Oklahoma State University.
Hi, welcome to Shop Stop. Have you ever had a situation where one of your gas-powered weed eaters or chainsaws is low on power and you can't really figure out what's happening? Maybe you change the plug and everything else and it's still low on power?
What they've got on two-cycle engines is called a spark arrestor, and in that spark arrestor there's a screen, and it's a very fine mesh screen, and what can happen is that can get plugged, and all you need to do is remove the plate off the spark arrestor and then take this screen out and clean it out and get all the carbon buildup off of it and replace it, and that should solve your power problems.
Essentially what happens is it gets plugged, and now then the exhaust is restricted, and you've got a little Jake brake on your power tools, and they can't get the air out of the cylinder like it's supposed to.
So if you've got some poor running two-cycle equipment, not producing power, take out the screen on the spark arrestor and clean it up.
That does it this week on Shop Stop. We'll see you next time.
Joining us once again for the latest in the livestock markets is Darrell Peel, our Extension Livestock Marketing Specialist. Darrell, let's start out with the impact of Sandy. We obviously know what's happened in New York and up in the Northeast. What does it do for cattle markets, though?
Well, you know, Sandy affected a tremendous population center, so it clearly had some impact on beef demand. You know, folks that knew the storm was coming weren't buying as many perishable foods. During the time of the storm, you know, they're not eating out as much and so on. And so that takes away business that'll never come back. It's just lost business for the beef industry. And I think we can see that in some of the weakness we've had in boxed beef prices. So it's a short-term, relatively short-term phenomenon. It's probably not in the grand scheme of things a really major event, but it does contribute to the current kind of weakness we're seeing and the sort of limitations we're seeing in beef demand right now.
Okay, of course, with that storm, they've had too much rain, but as we can see from this field, we need a lot of rain here.
You know, the wheat pasture situation is really disappointing this year. In contrast to last year where it was very dry early and it looked like we weren't going to have a chance for wheat pasture, when we finally got it, it was very, very good. This year it started off the other way. We had some moisture in September and early October, got the wheat planted, most of the wheat is up, and now it's dry again. There's no subsoil moisture, and so without additional rains, a lot of this wheat simply will not survive. And so we're very vulnerable to that right now. Clearly we don't have grazing potential at this point, and unless we get rain, we're not going to see any grazing potential.
And of course, that obviously is the stalker side of things, but let's talk about cow-calf operators. What are they seeing out there?
Well, you know, if you think about this summer as another drought year, compared to last year, we've not seen the kind of liquidation and the impacts on the cow-calf herd that we had last year. We had massive liquidation, partly because numbers were down. We haven't needed to liquidate this year. We did have better forage early in the year, but a lot of folks, you know, have sort of marginal hay supplies. They were counting on using wheat pasture for grazing, and more importantly, in many cases now, we find ourselves as dry or very nearly as dry as we were at any time last year, and the situation for pond water, stock water, is very, very critical in a lot of cases. And as we go forward, again, without rains, not only to make wheat pasture, but also to replenish some pond water, we're going to see increasing problems as we go through the winter for these cow-calf producers.
All right, let's put all of that into context of the markets. I guess the big question everybody has is, are we going to have another sell-off?
You know, I think we're heading towards that at this point in time. I mean, clearly the water situation as well as the forage situation, unless something changes and we start to see moisture, we're headed towards the next round of liquidation here in Oklahoma. Some of that will begin through the winter, because I think some of these producers don't have enough water, maybe not enough forage to get through the winter. And even if we do, but it's still dry next spring, clearly we will face almost immediate next round of liquidation going into the spring green up, or the lack of green up, if that should be the case next spring.
All right, good information as always. Darrell Peel, Livestock Marketing Specialist here at Oklahoma State University.
Certainly we're all aware that the input costs in cow-calf operations are extremely high. As we're getting closer and closer to the fall breeding season, that puts more and more emphasis on doing those managerial things that will ensure a high % calf crop next year when those cows have calves. Part of the whole equation, of course, are the bulls. Making sure that the bulls that we've purchased can do the job for which they have been bought. I think it's really important that early in the upcoming fall breeding season that we spend time observing bulls to make sure that they can travel correctly and that they can service cows as they go through, especially the first part of the breeding season. I think it's worth your time to get a thermos of hot coffee, go sit in the cab of the pickup and observe either at dawn's early light or at dusk to make sure that the bulls that you've purchased are traveling and are breeding cows successfully. Part of the questions about bulls is the cow to bull ratio. How many bulls do I need? Well, there's an old rule of thumb that I like that really I think is appropriate for many of the small cow-calf herds that we have here in Oklahoma, and that is that with young bulls, match the number of females with the bull according to his age in months. For instance, if he's truly a yearling bull, one that was born last fall, and he's only going to be about 13 or 14 months of age when he goes into that first breeding season, then that's about the maximum number of females that we should put him in the pasture with. If he's a bull that was a spring-born calf that now is nearly a year and a half in age, then something in the neighborhood of 15 to 18 cows or heifers with that bull is probably appropriate. And finally, as we get bulls that are 2-year-olds or older, then we can go to the more typical cow to bull ratios of 25 cows to the bull. And of course, if we have that bull that is experienced, that has done a good job for us in the past, has passed a breeding soundness exam, then perhaps we could stretch that out to 30 to 35 cows for that particular bull. But watching these bulls very carefully to make sure that if something is going wrong, we can identify that early in the breeding season to get that bull replaced so we don't lose part or all of the calf crop is very, very critical to our bottom line in our cow-calf operation. Hey, we look forward to visiting with you again next week on SUNUP's Cow-Calf Corner.
We're talking wheat prices with Kim Anderson, our grain marketing specialist. And Kim, let's get right to it. What's the latest?
The latest is just more of the same. The Kansas City Board of Trade December contract continues to waller around between that $8.69 support level and the $9.57 resistance level. I will say that on that December contract, it has moved into the upper 2/3 or the upper third of that price range. Just a slight upward trend on that December contract in that sideways pattern. If you look out at the July 13 contract, it does have an uptrend, and if you had a resistance price level, it popped through it the last week, and with this drought, that price just keeps going up.
Okay, more of the same, a little bit of hope, it sounds like. Argentina, Australia in the midst of their harvest. How are things going there? They're going about as expected. Some slight problems, dry in some areas, too wet in other areas. Kind of a normal harvest over a relatively large countries, Argentina and Australia. But I think they're coming in about as expected. Maybe qualities because of some wet weather, not as good as hoped for, and maybe a little bit lower yields, but that's what we've seen in about every harvest around the world this year. With what you've talked about, keeping that in mind, some producers are asking what they should do with their stored wheat right now. Well, our price increases is covering storage and interest right now. If they're using a third, and a third, it's as we get into the latter part of November, it's time to pull the trigger on that last third. They may want to hold some wheat into 2013, because if it doesn't rain and this winter wheat crop doesn't get established, those wheat prices are going to go up, and we could see some 50-cent, 60-cent price increases, say between now and February and March. Okay, and finally today, give us an idea of harvest delivery. Well, given the uncertainty of the 2013 wheat crop, I'd say I'd hold it. If I couldn't sleep at night because I wanted to get these prices, I'd sell a little bit of it, but I wouldn't get carried away, and I'd make sure I had crop insurance to cover anything that I forward contracted or hedged. Okay, always common sense advice. Kim, we'll see you next week. Thanks a lot.
Switching gears now, we want to tell you about an issue the Farm Service Agency is addressing.
The issue at hand, a civil rights settlement on the federal level for Hispanic and women farmers who may have been discriminated against in seeking farm loans between 1981 and 2000. Here's what's on the table: $1.3 billion in cash and tax relief, plus up to $160 million additional dollars in farm debt relief. Claims applications are due in March of 2013. Ryan McMullen is the State Director of USDA Rural Development.
Certainly having a large number of women producers, we want to do a significant amount of outreach to make sure that that any female farmers and ranchers that felt like they were subject to that kind of discrimination have an opportunity to access this process. Because again, we're committed to turning the page on any injustices that happened in the 80s and 90s, and making sure that everybody who felt like they were subject to that discrimination have an opportunity to access this process is critical in being able to do so.
OSU Extension's Jennifer Jensen says the claims process is just one of the topics for the Women in Agriculture conferences planned across the state.
We'll have everything from social media to marketing, legal issues, energy exploration. So basically helping our producers manage risk successfully, like we've been working to do for quite some time now, and it's nice to be able to talk about all these programs at the same time, and especially in some rather rural counties.
To find out more about the claims process, along with discrimination criteria and the Women in Ag conferences, go to our website, sunup.okstate.edu. That does it for us this week. Remember, you can see us anytime on our website, sunup.okstate.edu. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. I'm Lyndall Stout. Have a great week, everyone, and we'll see you next time at SUNUP.